I am John Taylor. Today, Isaiah 40 and I will be having a special report on the murder of Hae Lee. A quick summary on this murder. On January 13th, 1999, an 18-year-old woman named Hae Min Lee went missing from Baltimore County. She was last seen driving away from Woodlawn High School in a gray Nissan Sentra. Lee's body was found a month later in Baltimore's Leakin Park. She had been strangled. Her ex-boyfriend, Adnan Syed, who was 17, was eventually charged in her killing. Detectives pursued him as a suspect after Jay gave his testimony and said Adnan killed Hae and buried her, and Jay claimed he witnessed all of it. Multiple questionable evidence came forward, and prosecutors said Syed had murdered her out of jealousy after finding out she was dating someone else. No physical evidence tied Syed to the crime. Syed never admitted to killing Lee. In 2000, a jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, robbery, kidnapping, and false imprisonment. He was sentenced to life in prison. He had served 19 years in jail, and I believe he was wrongfully convicted for it. He is still in jail right now, and I think the real murderer is currently out on the loose. Adnan deserves to be back with his family, and I will show the massive evidence which proves that Adnan Syed is innocent. He did not murder Hae Lee. Now, why do I think Adnan Syed is innocent? Well, evidence and testimonies that were used to convict Adnan in court are unreliable and debunked. Jay's testimony was very inconsistent and switched around multiple times. Minor details were changed up. For example, he says he went to Westview Mall originally, but then he switched it to Security Square Mall. Also, the time windows were very short and switched as the story changed. His testimonies got more detailed as time went on, and he said he lied about them to the cops so he wouldn't get in trouble for selling drugs, which seems weird if he wasn't involved in the murder anyways. Now, it seems he was coached by detectives to give the testimony that he gave. You can listen to this evidence in undisclosed podcasts. There is also a strong possibility that Jay had the incentive to lie to detectives and implicate Adnan. He had his own criminal record hanging over his head, and pending convictions disappeared after he testified. Also, why did Jay help Adnan with the burying of the body and the whole thing? He could have just walked away or called the cops. As I stated earlier, a lot of the evidence that was used in the court was unreliable. For example, regarding the cell phone tower evidence, the cell phone tower expert that the state originally used at trial has signed an affidavit and testified that he would have not given the testimony had he been shown the full document from AT&T. We now know that the data provided by the cell phone company was not reliable for location in the way that it was used in the trial. Major mistakes were made by Adnan's attorney as well. An alibi was not called to court who said Adnan was at the library. Everyone who testified in court got their stories from Jay as well. No one actually witnessed the crime except for Jay, as he claimed. Credibility is taken away from the witnesses because they all had a little bit different stories, and they all came from Jay. How can Adnan be convicted on the basis of Jay's story when Jay has a criminal record and is constantly caught up in lies? His credibility is out the window. Also, the motive is simply not there. It was not an ugly breakup. Adnan moved on and was dating other girls. People knew Adnan was dating other girls, and they agreed that he was okay and he did not have some furious or hostile feelings towards Hae enough to kill her. In order to be convicted, you must be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Obviously, that is not true in Adnan's case. Therefore, I don't think it's fair to say Adnan was guilty and that he murdered Hae Lee. Simply, there's just no motive, and all the evidence that came from all of the witnesses is unreliable, and the cell phone evidence is unreliable as well. It's just not fair. I mean, he has to be convicted beyond a reasonable doubt, and it's simply just not there. There's no physical evidence. I think Adnan is innocent. Now, many people think Adnan was involved in the murder for many reasons. First of all, they thought it was very suspicious that he was not trying to get a hold of Hae Lee or contact her at all after she went missing. But, you see, this is very normal behavior for a teenager who has experienced a breakup. He might not want to talk to her or get a hold of her, but he still cared because he was going to friends and seeing what was up with her. People also think it is interesting that he has such a weird attitude, and he seems very defensive when he is questioned about Haley's murder, almost as if he did it. But he also seems like he is accepting his fate in prison and that there's nothing he can do about it. But in reality, he's just torn apart by the idea that people believed he could do such a crime and is passionate when people ask him about it. And he has been in jail for such a long time, so he is losing hope. Now, there are some additional questions that I have. And I wonder what type of impact there would be on the case if Adnan had a better attorney, and if an alibi was called in, and if the cell tower evidence was debunked, and overall if he was just represented better. Do you think maybe he wouldn't be seen as guilty and maybe innocent? Also, I wonder about the involvement of other people in this murder case. I wonder if there is any evidence that leads to Don's involvement in this murder, and why don't we hear more about him and his connection to Hay, and whether or not he was really the true murderer. Now that I've presented my facts and why I believe Adnan is innocent, now we're going over to Isaiah 40 and what he believes.
Thank you, John. My name is Isaiah 40, and here is my statement on the case Serial, with Adnan being guilty or innocent. My summary is that in Baltimore in 1999, Hayman Lee, a popular high school senior, disappears after school one day. After 3 weeks of her gone, missing a man on his lunch break pulls off the road to pee and stumbles on Hay's body in a city forest. His strange discovery makes Detective Rich and McGill-Avery suspicious. He walked 127 feet into the forest to find a body, which is not common. A few days after they found Hay's body, they find a lead with Jay. They find Jay at work late one night and bring him down to homicide. He states he doesn't know anything about the murder. A few days later, he comes back with a different story, saying he helped Adnan bury Hay's body. 6 weeks after Hay's death, detectives arrest her classmate and ex-boyfriend, Adnan Saeed, for her murder. He says he is innocent, though he can't exactly remember what he was doing on January that afternoon. But someone can. A classmate at Woodlawn High School says she knows where Adnan was, but no one knows where she is. He broke up with Adnan, but no one knows if he was sobbing around sad in the breakup and if he was raging plotting Hay's death. Stories have changed, evidence that has been brought up, but there is still no conclusion on what happened to Hay. And my thesis is, after listening to the evidence and stories of the crime, I come to the conclusion that Adnan is not guilty due to the different stories being told and not finding one solid story. 10 pieces of evidence to show that Adnan was not guilty is: first, there is no physical evidence to prove that Adnan is guilty. Second of all, Adnan was not raging after the breakup, plotting to kill her. He was sobbing more than anything. 3. Jay kept changing his story, first saying he knew nothing about the crime, then he came back a few days later and said that him and Adnan had put the body in the trunk. 4th, Lincoln Park is not close to the school. 5th, Jay shoveled the evidence, which leading there to be no evidence of Adnan doing that. 6th of all, Jay works at a porn video store that shows he might have fixation with women, leading to him killing Hay. 7th, Jay's story is all over the place and can't get a full piece of evidence. 8th, diary shows that Adnan is not an awful, controlling dude. He's more of a calm, collective guy. 9th, friends can't remember anything weird that day happening with Adnan or Hay. And finally, 10th, Adnan is a well-known kid who won't do anything that would get him in trouble, leading him not to do wrongful actions that may cause him to, lose his respect that he has gained. Although there is evidence to prove Adnan is guilty, for example, Jay's word that Adnan had killed Hay, and Adnan doesn't have a detailed story on what happened that day. One big thing that may show Adnan is guilty is that he strangled Hay in the Best Buy parking lot, showing that he has aggression. But that is the only argument that they had like that. Even though there is evidence to show he is guilty, it's not enough. And it may not be true. The biggest thing that shows Adnan is not guilty is that Jay has altered his story multiple times, and it's very detailed, which shows that it could be all a lie, but who knows? And here are my 2 questions. First question, do you think if they never found Hay's body in the woods a month after the death, would Adnan still be a main suspect in her missing? And here's my second question. After learning Adnan's character throughout the case, do you think Adnan would carry out such a violent crime?
I'm John Taylor.
And I'm Isaiah Forty.
Thank you for listening to why we believe Adnan is innocent in this case.
Have a good day.